This is the iPad, also commonly referred to as the cheap one. You know, that $300-odd one Apple sells. Well, this was actually the first one of that line, and it was released in early 2017. And I just bought it, directly from Apple, refurbished. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 9.7-inch 2017 iPad 5th generation. How does it hold up almost 4 years later? Now, some might be surprised right off the bat that Apple still sells such an old device, but they don't, actually. At least not anymore. Refurbished products tend to come and go really quickly, depending on the stock available, and you can see what's around by going to Apple's site and scrolling to the bottom where it says refurbished and clearance. This is where this iPad popped up. In fact, right now you can see they have the 7th gen iPad, although it is out of stock. The iPad 5 costed me about $269 Canadian, which translates roughly to about $200 US. The iPad 8, currently the best cheap iPad, costs $330, so I essentially saved $130 by getting this nearly 4-year-old device. Okay, so that's not a fantastic deal, I'll admit it, but I don't think that's so much the fault of this iPad as it is the iPad 8 just being really good value. Because I'll be frank, the iPad 5 for $200 has kind of blown me away. It is much, much better than I expected. But I'll get to all that, so let's back up here and start with the design of the iPad 5th generation. There's no question that this is a massively different iPad from its predecessor, the iPad 4. And it isn't really fair to call the iPad 4 its predecessor, given that it came out in 2012 and the iPad 5 years later. But going by Apple's naming scheme, this is technically true, as Apple brought back the base iPad line to fulfill their budget iPad role. And the iPad 5 has quickly been replaced by the 6, 7, and 8 in the past few years. The designs have stayed basically the same across the board, with the only difference being a small decrease in the bezels, but otherwise, this thin and light, all aluminum iPad perfectly holds up. I've always liked this look, and while some might criticize Apple from not moving on from it sooner, I'd say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. For colors, we've got some pretty basic options in silver, gold, and space gray. I, of course, have space gray, which has always been my favorite iPad color, as I like the black bezels. And the bezels are fairly thick, but I don't really mind too much, because, you know, when you're holding the iPad, it's kind of nice to hold it by the bezels. And we also do have a terrific Touch ID home button on the bottom that works perfectly for an iPad like this. Of course, on the bottom of the device is the Lightning port, same as the iPad 8, and on the top we have the headphone jack, a feature that has now been killed on both the iPad Air and Pro lines, sadly enough. And the Lightning port has as well, actually. USB-C is both on the Air and the iPad Pro. The 9.7-inch Retina display looks pretty great, with a healthy resolution of 1536 by 2048 and pixel density of 264 pixels per inch. This is the same basic display Apple's been using forever, and it looks really good, although this screen isn't laminated, which is annoying. This means there's a bit of a gap between the top glass and the LCD itself, so when you touch the iPad, it doesn't really feel like you're touching the display. It feels kind of like you're touching above the display, because you are. It's just not right at your fingertips like it is with nicer, newer iPads, and this goes the same for the 8th generation iPad as well. It's something that I don't usually notice, but it is worth mentioning. It's just a way Apple cuts costs, which may or may not be a deal breaker for some of you. Try it out in a store if you're not really sure what I mean. We also don't have True Tone, which is a nice little feature that can help the screen feel more natural in different settings, so that's a pity. Also, we don't have Apple Pencil support at all here, which is really a pity. The iPad 6 would get this the next year, but I wish it was on here because the Apple Pencil is a lot of fun to use and to me feels just right on an iPad. But anyone getting this iPad in today's world, or even still using it, probably is on a budget anyways and wouldn't be looking to drop another $100 on what is essentially just a glorified stylus, even if it is a very, very good glorified stylus. And of course, there's no smart connector, which means those fancy Apple keyboards won't work here, and you'll need to find a different option. At the end of the day, this is one of the most basic iPad designs Apple's ever had, but I think that can be easily excused by the cheap price point. And even now, when the price is kind of irrelevant, I think the design can still be excused, even without any of the new features that we appreciate, because it's functional, and that's really what's important. It's light, it's easy to use and bring around, and as far as tablets go, this iPad still holds up really well. Functionality is important, and this iPad does it well. But you know what isn't important on a tablet? The camera. Yeah, iPads have camera, but they historically haven't been very good, and this iPad isn't an exception. The main sensor on the back is 8 megapixels and can take very mediocre photos. I'm not sure I'd call them bad. Heck, they might even be borderline acceptable for a tablet. This thing can also film 1080p video if you're recording with your tablet for some reason, because, I mean, you shouldn't record video with your tablet, and that goes for taking photos as well. I don't see many situations why you'd use an iPad over your phone for taking pictures. Your phone is very, very likely going to be better, and it's probably more comfortable to actually, hold up. And so, yeah, that's why the camera really isn't important here. But for the few cases where the camera might be nice, like FaceTime or whatever, this iPad will get the job done. Although that selfie camera does leave a lot to be desired, with only 1.2 megapixels and 720p video. It's bad, like really bad for 2017. And while, yeah, again, this is a tablet, FaceTime or Zoom or whatever isn't an uncommon use case for tablets, so a better front-facing camera would have been nice. So even though this iPad was meant to be really cheap from the get-go, I do think Apple probably could have put a better selfie camera in this thing. When it comes to old or cheap iPads, you can't expect a good camera, but what you can expect is a good battery. And this iPad with its newly replaced battery, thanks to it being refurbished, is great. Battery life has been very good for me, as the iPad lasts at least a couple days without charge, even with a decent amount of use. The battery itself is sized at 8,827 milliamp hours, and that's about what you'd expect and want for an iPad like this, although if you buy this iPad secondhand and it's been used consistently over the past few years, the battery might have degraded and it may not be terrific. What is terrific, or was terrific I should say, is the technical specifications. For early 2017, it's exactly what you would want on a budget Apple device. The A9 chipset and 2 gigabytes of RAM, along with either 32 or 128 gigabytes of storage. This is pretty solid, and it still has full support on iPadOS 14 today. It started off with iOS 10.3 for some perspective. Will this iPad get iPadOS 15? That's a good question, and to be honest, I do not know. Apple's patterns with dropping support have been kind of all over the place the last couple years, so it could really go either way, although there are lower spec iPads such as the iPad Mini 4 with the A8 chipset still fully supported, so that might be a good sign. And here's the thing, based on patterns, I'd say no, this iPad probably won't get iPadOS 15. And it very well could, but it also likely probably won't. I don't want to raise expectations, but I'm actually okay with it not getting the new update, which will be at the end of 2021. And the reason for that is because this thing is performing fantastically for its age on iPadOS 14. Like, this does not feel like a device with a 5-year-old chipset. When I first got it and started messing around with it, I actually thought maybe I was wrong. I had it in my head that this thing had the A9, which it does, but I started to think maybe it was actually the A10 because it felt so fast. But no, it's the A9. This iPad is just really well optimized. Now, of course, it's not perfect. The OS feels really good, and most apps I've tried seem to work without a hitch, but you probably will have slowdowns here and there, maybe more frequently than me. It may not be your personal experience to have good performance, and I'm probably helped by the fact that this thing does have a brand new battery and a fresh install of software. But even so, I'm very impressed with how the iPad 5 has held up, especially given nearly 4 years ago it only costed a bit over $300. This was the budget device nearly 4 years ago, and not only is it usable today, it feels pleasant. What does this tell us? That the iPad 5 is actually worth picking up? No, you shouldn't buy this thing anymore. I mean, unless you find like a really good deal that you really want. For $200, it is worth it, don't get me wrong, but the iPad 8 for just over $300 is way more worth it. And this iPad shows us why. It shows us how well Apple is setting up their cheap iPad line in terms of specs and performance. The iPad 8 could last another 4 or 5 years, if not longer, and yeah, you'll probably want to buy a new tablet before then anyways, but it's still very impressive that you probably wouldn't have to. It's just fantastic. I think this iPad perfectly shows why Apple is the best when it comes to tablets nowadays, and it isn't even close. But with that, I'm about done here. This iPad has blown me away. It's good, almost even great, and I likely will end up legitimately using it as I don't currently own a better iPad. I have been using it since I got it. It works well. It streams YouTube, Netflix, whatever you want. This is a fully functional tablet that'll do what you'd want a tablet to do despite its age and cheap nature. Should you buy it? Again, no. The iPad iPad 8 is the one to buy. Save your pennies and get the iPad 8 instead. It's gonna last a lot longer, it's gonna be faster out of the gate. Plus, the iPad 8 has the A12 chipset, which is pretty darn good, as well as Apple Pencil support and smart keyboard support if you're interested in that. And it's still got the headphone jack, so who knows how long that's gonna last. But with that, any of you have any of the cheaper iPads? Which one, and how's it working for you? Let me know in the comments down below. Hopefully you found this video interesting or helpful, and if you did, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. And we also have a Discord channel you should go check out, link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91tech, and I will see you all next time.